when I shared my weekly restaurant leftovers with a tired old homeless man outside my apartment. I thought I was just doing what felt right. After my devastating divorce left me with nothing, those leftovers were often my only real meals. I had no idea the man I helped was Vincent Sterling, CEO of Sterling Capital Holdings, who had disguised himself as a beggar to test people's compassion. What happened when he revealed his true identity, involving mysterious packages, luxury cars, and life-changing gifts, proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Hi everyone, welcome to Life's Changing Stories. Now, let's dive into today's story. At 34, Sofia found herself in Phoenix with 2 suitcases, $800 in cash, and the crushing realization that 15 years of marriage had left her completely unprepared for independent survival. Derek had systematically isolated her from friends and family, convinced her to quit her teaching job to focus on their future, and manage their finances with an iron fist that had left her with no credit history and no marketable skills that employers seemed to want. The first month was the hardest. Sofia stayed in a weekly rate motel that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, spending her days walking between restaurants, retail stores, and cleaning services, begging for any work that would pay enough to cover rent and food. The rejection was constant and humiliating. Employers took one look at the 15-year gap in her resume and the desperation in her eyes, then politely explained they were looking for someone with more recent experience. After 3 weeks of searching, Sofia finally found work at Marcelino's, an upscale Italian restaurant in central Phoenix that needed a dishwasher for their evening shift. The pay was minimum wage, barely enough to cover rent on a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, but it came with one crucial benefit. Restaurant staff were allowed to take home leftover food once a week. Every Thursday after the dinner rush, explained Roberto, the head chef who had taken pity on Sofia's obvious desperation. Whatever's left over from prep or what comes back untouched from the dining room. It's good food and it shouldn't go to waste. That weekly collection of leftovers became Sofia's lifeline. Carefully portioned and stretched across 7 days, the restaurant food provided nutrition that her meager salary couldn't otherwise afford. She learned to make gourmet pasta last for 3 meals, to savor small portions of expensive proteins, and to be grateful for vegetables that hadn't come from the discount rack at the grocery store. Sofia's studio apartment was a 10-minute walk from Marcelino's through a neighborhood that transformed from business district to residential as she moved farther from the main street. The walk gave her time to decompress after her shifts, which often ran until 10 or 11 p.m., depending on how busy the restaurant had been. One Thursday night in late September, Sofia left Marcelino's carrying a particularly generous collection of leftovers. Roberto had been experimenting with new menu items, and the kitchen had produced more food than the evening's customers could consume. Sofia's usual single container had been supplemented with a second helping of wild mushroom risotto, grilled vegetables, and even a slice of tiramisu that had been returned untouched from a table. As she approached her apartment building, Sofia noticed an elderly man sitting on the concrete steps outside the entrance. He looked exhausted, his clothes wrinkled and dirty, his gray hair uncombed. Even in the dim streetlight, she could see the weariness in his posture, the way he held his head in his hands as if carrying an unbearable weight. Sofia's first instinct was caution. She had learned to be wary of strangers during her months of vulnerable independence. But something about the man's stillness, the quiet dignity of his despair, reminded her of her own lowest moments. She remembered sitting in her car outside the courthouse after signing the divorce papers, feeling like the world had forgotten she existed. She climbed the steps slowly, fishing her keys from her purse, and noticed the man glance up at her approach. His eyes were clear but tired, and she could see he was older than she had initially thought, probably in his 70s, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. "Excuse me," Sofia said softly, pausing at her door. "Are you all right?" The man looked surprised that anyone had spoken to him. "I'm fine, miss, just resting for a moment." His voice was cultured, despite his appearance, with the kind of careful diction that suggested education and better circumstances. Sofia felt her heart constrict with recognition. This was what respectability looked like when life stripped away everything else. "Have you eaten today?" she asked, the question emerging before she could consider the implications. The man hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sofia saw her answer. She looked down at the containers of food in her hands, enough to feed her for a week if she was careful, but more than enough for 2 people for 1 meal. "Wait here," she said, unlocking her door. "I'll be right back." In her tiny kitchen, Sofia opened the containers and breathed in the rich aromas of Roberto's cooking. She had been looking forward to this meal all day, knowing it would be the best food she'd eat until next Thursday. But the image of the old man's tired eyes lingered in her mind, and she found herself dividing the food into 2 portions without hesitation. She grabbed a large bowl, filled it with risotto, vegetables, and bread, then added a bottle of water and plastic utensils. The man was still sitting on the steps when she returned, looking surprised to see her emerge from the building. "Hello, sir," Sofia said, extending the bowl toward him. "You must be hungry." The man stared at the food, then at Sofia, his eyes filling with something that might have been tears. I can't accept this. You're too kind." "Please," Sofia insisted. "I have more than enough, and it seemed better to share it with someone." The man accepted the bowl with shaking hands, and Sofia could see the genuine hunger in the way he immediately began to eat. Between bites, he looked up at her with gratitude that made her chest ache. "I was famished," he admitted. "I'd lost hope of getting some food. Many people saw me here, but they ignored me. You must be an angel." Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not an angel. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like when people look through you like you're not there." The man nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Thank you," he said simply. "This kindness means more than you know." Sofia climbed the stairs to her apartment, listening to the man's continued expressions of gratitude echoing in the stairwell. Inside her studio, she divided her remaining food into smaller portions, calculating how to make it last the week. But for the first time in months, she felt something warmer than satisfaction with her budgeting skills. She felt the deep contentment that comes from doing something meaningful for another person. The next morning, Sofia expected to see the man still sitting on the steps, but he was gone. She assumed he had found shelter or moved on to another neighborhood, and the demands of her job quickly pushed the encounter to the back of her mind. Her days were consumed with the physical exhaustion of restaurant work, the constant calculations of survival, and the slow, difficult process of rebuilding a life from nothing. Exactly 1 week later, Sofia was awakened at 7 a.m. by knocking on her door. She stumbled out of bed, expecting to find her landlord or perhaps a neighbor with a noise complaint. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. She was about to close the door when she noticed a small box sitting on her doormat. It was wrapped in brown paper with no return address or identifying marks. Sofia brought the box inside and unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she saw the contents. 2 thick bundles of $100 bills sat inside the box, along with a small handwritten note on expensive stationery. Sofia's hands shook as she unfolded the note and read, "This is my little way of showing appreciation. Thank you for your kindness." Sofia sank into her single chair, staring at the money with disbelief. She had never seen so much cash in one place, easily several $1,000s, more than she made in 3 months at the restaurant. The note provided no clue about the sender's identity, and Sofia spent the rest of the day trying to understand who could have sent such an extraordinary gift. She considered everyone she had shown kindness to in recent months, co-workers who might have appreciated her help, neighbors who had received her assistance, even customers at the restaurant who had witnessed her going out of her way to be helpful. But none of these people had the resources for such generosity, and most barely knew her name. The old man from the steps crossed her mind briefly, but Sofia dismissed the thought immediately. Someone living on the street couldn't possibly afford to give away thousands of dollars, even if he had wanted to repay her small kindness. Over the following days, Sofia found herself unable to touch the money. She wrapped the bundles in a plastic bag and locked them in her kitchen cabinet, telling no one about the mysterious gift. The rational part of her mind suggested there had been some mistake, that the money belonged to someone else and would eventually be reclaimed. But a deeper part of her hoped the gift was real and represented some kind of turning point in her difficult new life. 2 weeks after receiving the package, Sofia was finishing her shift at Marcelino's when Roberto approached her with an unusual expression. "There's someone outside asking for you," he said, his eyebrows raised with curiosity. "Says his name is Vincent Sterling. Do you know anyone by that name?" Sofia felt her stomach drop. She didn't know anyone by that name, and the fact that a stranger knew where she worked filled her with anxiety. In her months of careful anonymity, she had deliberately avoided giving anyone information about her employment or living situation. "I don't know anyone named Vincent Sterling," she told Roberto. "Are you sure he's asking for me specifically?" "He knew your full name and said it was important that he speak with you personally. He's waiting outside in a car." Sofia reluctantly followed Roberto to the restaurant's front window and peered out at the street. 2 black luxury sedans were parked outside, one with tinted windows, one with clear glass. As she watched, an elderly man in an expensive navy blue suit emerged from the first car and walked toward the restaurant entrance. Even from a distance, Sofia could see this was someone accustomed to wealth and authority. His bearing was confident, his clothes were perfectly tailored, and the way he moved suggested someone who expected to be taken seriously. But something about his face seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. The man entered the restaurant and approached Sofia with a warm smile. "Hello, Sofia," he said. "Did you like my gift? I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you in person. I was out of town on business." Sofia stared at him in confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are. What gift are you talking about?" The man's smile widened. "I'm Vincent Sterling, CEO of Sterling Capital Holdings. And yes, I was the one who sent you the money." Sofia felt the world tilt slightly. Sterling Capital Holdings was one of the largest investment firms in the Southwest, with offices in Phoenix, Denver, and Las Vegas. She had seen their name on billboards and news reports about major development projects throughout Arizona. "I don't understand," Sofia said slowly. "Why would you send me money? I've never met you before." Vincent Sterling's expression became more serious. "Actually, you have met me. You were the only person who helped me that night when others didn't." The pieces began falling into place in Sofia's mind, but the implications seemed impossible. "That night? Are you? It can't be. There's no way you're the old man I shared food with." "I'm the one," Vincent confirmed gently. Sofia felt her legs weaken. The tired, hungry man in wrinkled clothes had been one of the wealthiest people in Arizona. "How is that possible? You looked homeless. You looked like you were begging for money. But now you look like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company?" Vincent finished with a chuckle. "Because that's exactly what I am. I was disguising myself as a homeless man to conduct a little experiment in human nature." Sofia sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. "An experiment?" Vincent's expression became more thoughtful. "I've been blessed with tremendous wealth, but it's also isolated me from genuine human connection. People treat me differently when they know who I am. They want something from me, or they're intimidated by my position. I was feeling lonely and curious about how people would treat me if they didn't know my real identity. He paused, looking directly into Sofia's eyes. I spent 3 months visiting different neighborhoods in Phoenix, dressed as a homeless man, sitting outside apartment buildings and businesses. Hundreds of people walked past me. Some threw coins, but most ignored me completely. You were the only person who offered genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. Sofia thought about that night, remembering her impulse to share her precious weekly food with a stranger. I knew what it felt like to be hungry and invisible. I couldn't walk past someone who needed help. Exactly, Vincent said. You showed compassion even when you clearly had very little to spare. That's extraordinary, and it deserved to be rewarded. Before Sofia could respond, Vincent handed her a set of car keys. That's not all. I noticed you walk to work every day, so I thought you might need this too. Sofia looked at the keys, then out the window at the luxury sedans. I can't accept this. It's too much. The silver one is yours, Vincent said with a smile. Nothing too flashy, just reliable transportation that will keep you safe. Sofia's composure finally cracked. She covered her mouth with her hands, fell to her knees, and began crying with the intensity of someone who had been holding back months of fear and desperation. The kindness was overwhelming, impossible to process, more generous than anything she had ever imagined possible. Through her tears, she hugged Vincent tightly, repeating "thank you" until the words lost meaning. Her co-workers had gathered around, and Roberto was wiping his own eyes as he watched the scene unfold. "This is why I love working in restaurants," Roberto said to the other staff members. "Sometimes you get to witness miracles." The money Vincent had sent allowed Sofia to put a down payment on a small house in a safe neighborhood, with a yard where she could plant flowers and a kitchen where she could cook for herself instead of surviving on leftovers. But despite her newfound financial stability, Sofia chose to continue working at Marcelino's. "This job taught me how to survive when I had nothing," she explained to Roberto when he expressed surprise at her decision to stay. "I don't want to forget that lesson, and I don't want to take security for granted." The experience also transformed Sofia's approach to helping others. She began volunteering at local food banks, not because she expected rewards, but because she had learned that kindness created connections that fed the soul as much as the body. She started carrying extra snacks in her car to offer to homeless people she encountered, and she made a point of treating service workers with the respect and attention that everyone deserved. Vincent Sterling became a regular presence in Sofia's life, visiting her at the restaurant and eventually becoming like a grandfather she had never had. His own children lived on the East Coast and rarely visited, and he found genuine joy in Sofia's company and authentic friendship. Their relationship was built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Vincent appreciated Sofia's honesty and lack of pretension, while Sofia valued his wisdom and genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. They shared meals, attended cultural events, and had long conversations about everything from business philosophy to family relationships. "You know," Vincent told Sofia one evening as they sat in her backyard garden, "I've made a lot of money in my lifetime, but the most valuable thing I've ever received was a bowl of risotto from someone who couldn't afford to give it away." Sofia smiled, thinking about how much her life had changed since that night on the apartment steps. "I've learned that the greatest wealth isn't in what you own, but in the connections you make with other people. Everything else is just details." The story of Sofia and Vincent became legendary at Marcelino's, inspiring other staff members to look for opportunities to help people in their community. Roberto started a program where the restaurant donated leftover food to local shelters, and several employees began volunteering their time to serve meals at homeless centers. Sofia proved something important, Roberto would tell new employees. Kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's the most valuable thing you can give another person. You never know when a simple gesture will change someone's life, or when it will change your own. Years later, Sofia would look back on that Thursday night as the moment her real life began. Not because of the money, or the car, or the house, but because she had chosen compassion over caution, generosity over self-protection. The reward wasn't the gift Vincent had given her. It was the discovery that she was the kind of person who would share her last meal with a stranger, even when she didn't know if there would be another one. Vincent Sterling's experiment in human nature had yielded results he hadn't expected. He had set out to test other people's compassion, but he had ended up finding something more valuable than he had imagined possible: a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values, with someone who cared about him for who he was rather than what he owned. The greatest gifts in life, they both learned, were often disguised as ordinary moments of human connection. Sofia's willingness to share her food had created a bond that enriched both their lives in ways that no amount of money could have purchased. And in a world that often seemed divided by wealth and status, their friendship stood as proof that kindness transcends all artificial boundaries, creating connections that transform both the giver and the receiver in equal measure. We hope you enjoyed today's story of love, life, and betrayal. For more free stories and entertainment from our channel, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe with notifications.